r/AskReddit by Reddition. Like and subscribe. People of Reddit are new celebrities. Before they were famous, how different do they act now? My grandpa, RIP, owned a grocery store in Miami in the late 70s. Wesley Snipes and his friends once stole some candy from his store, and when he caught them, he let them have it. Since then Wesley and his friends were regulars. Once, Wesley left his bike in front of the store, and it got stolen. Was a pretty bad area. My grandpa gave him his old bike, that he kept in the back of the store. My uncle took over in 2001, when my grandpa died. In 2007 he came back to the store, while my uncle and cousin were there, to ask about my grandpa. My uncle said they talked for a little over an hour about how my grandpa, treated him like a son. When he found out my grandpa passed, he felt guilty he didn't visit sooner. He embraced my uncle and cousin and left. My uncle said he told him they plan on having the building repainted while they talked. About a week later a crew of painters arrived and told my uncle they were already paid to have the building repainted. Such a genuine dude. I went to high school with Sandra Rowe. She was funny, dynamic, smart, outgoing, and very into drama. In one school play, she played what I will call sort of a mime character. She didn't have lines, but was still a big part of the action, commenting on what was going on through her actions. Anyhow, in one scene as she was exiting the stage she banged her head on one of the props. You could hear the loud bang, but she was a pro and just carried on. It has been great to see her have such success, and I love that she has kept in touch with her close friends from high school. You can spot them at awards shows sometimes. I went to the same high school as Chris D'Elia. He was a dork, but still arrogant. He worked on the yearbook and gave himself like 3 or 4 pages so he could write his fatuous observations and pretend it was comedy. So that hasn't changed. But in other ways I guess he has changed. He never had sex with high schoolers back then. This is real late and secondhand, but I knew someone who went to ACM with Ed Sheeran. He said he was lazy in class, skipped classes and just wanted to smoke weed, and my acquaintance was mad when Ed started getting more and more famous, when Ed didn't even bother with his music courses. I thought that was funny. Worked in a restaurant about 15 years ago as a manager. Rachel McAdams walked in for an interview. She was still in acting school and serving table to pay for it. She worked at my restaurant over the course of the next 2 summers, serving on our patio. Still friends to this day. She hasn't changed a bit. Still bikes to get groceries. My aunt used to work with Gordon Ramsay's mother, but never made the connection. Once they were out for lunch and he ended up coming in to see his mum and met my aunt in the process. She said he was so lovely and polite. Plus my dad has a bunch of Gordon's old jumpers he didn't want anymore. Not signed or anything like that, it's just a fun family story now. I went to college with Joe Keery, aka Steve Harrington in Stranger Things. He was my college boyfriend's sweet mate and just the nicest guy. His hair has always been dreamy and amazing. Last time I saw him was at a viewing of The Hateful Eight after we graduated, and he still made a point to come over and say hi. Friend of mine was friends with Tom Hanks in high school and went to prom with him. He still writes her personalized B-Day cards on one of his typewriters. I hope one day I'll be so rich and successful that I can afford multiple typewriters. I went to junior high with Norah Jones. She was the most sincere and serene person. She was fun to talk to, and she never gave a hint of who her father was. The night she won all those Grammys was very telling that she hadn't changed a bit. I went to high school with Mark Ruffalo. He was nice. He was one of those thespians. Our high school had an acting group that challenged the students to get out of their shell and do things in front of strangers, like introducing yourself as a wild fairy of the woods and presenting them with a flower. We didn't talk much, but like I said, he was a good guy. Went to middle school with Megan Fox for a bit. She rode my bus and she mostly kept to herself. Most of the guys would fight over who was going to sit next to her, but she was very shy and didn't really have much to say. I went to school with Rupert Grint, Ron Weasley from Harry Potter. I was into acting too, so we had done a few school plays together. He was really nice, very chill, a good laugh. I haven't seen him since school days, but he kept coming to classes whenever he wasn't filming, was always happy to chat about the movies. Sometimes he'd need a little break from so many people wanting to talk and would come and hang out in the library, and honestly, you'd never know he was in the biggest film series at the time. Honestly, I think a lot of these answers boil down to if they want fame or not. Rupert loved what he was doing, but didn't care about being famous and having people kiss his ass. Just a nice normal kid. A co-worker of mine met Daisy Ridley while on a backpacking trip, got to know each other pretty well while traveling together. She told my co-worker that she wanted to become an actress. Looks like that panned out pretty well. They said Daisy was an absolutely lovely individual. I live in the town where Dolly Parton grew up, and practically everyone above the age of 50 who grew up here claims to either be a distant relative of Dolly's, or they claim to know her in some way. Everyone has their story of the time they met Dolly. It's pretty obvious, but regardless of who you talk to, Dolly has always been sweet and generous, but everything has simply grown exponentially due to her fame. Examples are the millions of books she gives out for free to children around the globe each month, or how she gave out $10,000 cash to many of my close friends after their houses burned in a fire a couple years back. Thousands of people are employed here and work for one of the businesses she owns, and it's a tad strange to see when you walk in, but the birthing center at the local hospital is funded by and named after her. I honestly can't think of one person I know who doesn't like her. Dolly's heart has only gotten bigger because of fame. My dad went to school with Steve Irwin, reckons he was exactly the same as a young fella. He would be away from school all the time on trips with Bob to Rescue and rehome Crocs all over Australia. No good at footy but. My grandfather taught Jack Nicholson in high school math class. Said he was rebellious, but wasn't too bad at math. My mom used to ride the bus to work in downtown Cleveland with Steve Harvey's first wife. Apparently she supported him while he was trying to get his career started. And then basically, as soon as he got successful he divorced her for a younger woman. My mom always hated him because she felt that he treated his first wife like shit and always yells bastard at the TV when he pops up. Edit. Thanks for the gold. I told my mom that the internet likes her and hates Steve Harvey, so you've made her day. A friend of mine is buddies with Paul Rudd. Says he's exactly the same and a great human. I knew Robert Pattinson about 15 years ago. Nice guy, friendly, a lot of fun to be with. He lived by himself in the center of Soho, London, in a tiny one-bed flat that I think he felt like the romantic vision of a starving artist, or at least wanted to. He had a weird side. He'd say random, violent, depraved things. He was obsessed with Jack Nicholson. He never really gave a flip. He had confidence, and he was always himself, and he knew he could be deliberately contradictory, and he used that as a personality trope. But he was a good guy, and I get the impression he's very comfortable with himself, now that he has developed his career, that he acts very well, and that he can pick and choose his roles based upon what he wants to do, and who he wants to work with. Twilight for him was always a means to an end, and I think he worked it very much to his benefit, and didn't compromise himself. Bruno Mars's mom was a bartender at a local karaoke dive bar that I was a regular at the time. His biggest hit was The Hook for Billionaire by Travie McCoy. Anyway, she was selling tickets for an upcoming concert he was having, and she asked our table if we wanted to buy some. My friend declined, and she exclaimed, "Why not? He's my son." I ended up getting a couple of tickets despite not knowing any of Bruno Mars's songs. It turned out to be one of the best concerts I've ever been to. The guy knows how to put on a good live show. The tickets were only $40 each, I think. His opening act was a local group of large Polynesian men singing M.O. Town who went by the name Nesian 9. They were pretty good too. The next time he was in town for a concert, he had blown up and the tickets were going for $400. I would have loved to see him again, but not at that price. His mom was really nice, down to earth, and a pretty good singer herself. R.I.P. Bernie. At least she lived long enough to see her son's success. My co-worker's dad grew up with Queen Latifah in North Jersey. His whole family loves her because they were about to lose their house, so she paid it off for them. They've never said a bad thing about her. Queen Latifah, if this gets back to you, thanks for what you did for your friends in NJ. Phil's a really cool guy. My grandmother and mum were really good friends with George Michael and Andrew Ridgeley from Wham. They got invited to concerts and got to sit in special seats, etc. And a few years ago me and my family stayed with Andrew Ridgeley in his guest house in Cornwall for a weekend. But they seemed to me like they stayed really nice to my grandparents and mum. And Andrew Ridgeley was very kind to my family when we met him. My mom is friends with Johnny Knoxville's cousin. She met him once and had no idea who he was. She said he was nice and funny as all hell. She didn't realize until years later she'd even met him until I showed her one of his movies. From what I gather, he's a normal dude and pretty hilarious. One of my aunts actually dated Bill Gates for a bit. I believe a few years before things took off for him. She said he was too into her or something like that at the time and weirded her out, I guess. Sorry about the lack of detail. Bill is a great guy, but he's certainly odd. I once had an opportunity to present some work to him in a 2013 review at Microsoft. What was amazing about him is you could show Bill the product code name, for instance Blue, which was Windows 10, and he somehow magically be able to tell you the 5-year plan along with how it's going to perform and turn out. Bill was able to think 50 miles ahead of everyone, so it makes a ton of sense that most people might think he's a little odd. The whole F-bomb factor was real. However, he seemed to have chilled a little when we presented in 2013. My mum knew Mel B from her high school. Apparently she always copied other people's work. The comments really got me thinking. There seems to be a lot of actual celebrities that stayed perceptually genuine after gaining fame. Meanwhile, now I personally know a few social media influencers who seem to talk down to anyone that can't afford to live in LA. I just find it interesting. Kesha. Total nerd 1600 on her sats. Quiet. A bit of a social outcast. Nice, though. You could tell she cared about others and wouldn't ever hurt a flea. My brother used to play basketball with a bunch of people in high school. Among those who would sometimes join in was Pete Davidson. My brother said he got ripped on a ton and no one really liked him. But that might just be because he wasn't great at basketball. I went to high school with Post Malone. We graduated the same year. He always wore a suit to class and was that nerdy, dedicated kid. Glad to see how his life turned out. I hope nothing for the best for him, and now I listen to him all the time, haha. I'm just a rando to him though. We never really talked. I knew Cillian Murphy back in secondary school. We didn't go to the same school but mingled a lot. He was a few years older than me. Dude was super quiet, but really damn friendly. I remember when he was cast in 28 Days Later, and people were pretty hyped for him, but a good few people didn't think much of it. Once it came out though, a lot of people changed their tune when they could see him actually act amazingly. I knew Tom Holland at the time he did that Tsunami movie. We were not really friends, but he was so funny and friendly. I had a teacher who taught Drake. Apparently he was a nice kid, but then got really douchy when he started getting famous. My mom knew Seal as far back as when he was still trying to be an architect, and she says he was always really nice. They didn't stay in touch, she moved away, and they were never close, but she said he went out of his way to foster genuine connections to people before and after his music started to gain traction. He always had star quality. Everyone from the most important person in the room to a janitor walking through would be drawn to him, and he'd engage with everyone in a way that really stuck. She always mentions that he was just a really sincere, deeply felt person. My bio teacher was friends with Rainn Wilson, Dwight from The Office. They used to grab coffee often around the time The Office started. From how she described him, Rainn seems like a pretty down-to-earth guy. I went to high school with Daka Montgomery. He was a dick with a huge ego in high school, and I saw him recently when he came back to his hometown, and seems like he's still a dick with an even bigger ego now. I can't watch Stranger Things without rolling my eyes every time he comes on screen. My dad was good friends with Johnny Depp back in the day. It was around when he was first filming 21 Jump Street, the show, not the movie lol. My dad says he was really humble and kind, and always paid their bar tab. Apparently he was quite generous in giving out lots of free quality cocaine at parties too. I had a friend in high school whose cousin is Kendrick Lamar. He said Kendrick's pretty much still the same guy, acts the same around friends and family, just with millions of dollars now. My aunt was best friends with Madonna in high school, stayed friends until she got famous, and she turned into a completely different person in the worst way possible. Tyler the Creator, exactly the same. We were all concerned at how bizarre he was. He would call people a table or something incredibly random, and the sense of humor caught on in my high school. The fame did nothing, he's still strange and a sweetheart. Mom knew Jeff Bezos' sister in high school, never really knew him all that well, but she says he was well known to be a grade A dickhead. Very full of himself, and huge god complex, even before he went to Princeton etc. So really not that much different from what I can tell. Jeff Bezos was probably like Dennis Reynolds in high school. Jack Black is the same person he was as a teenager, funny, kind, caring, and spreading that joy of music. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe for daily Reddit videos.